Floodgates, here we go.
All right.
I'll just give it a few moments while everybody's audio connects. Okay. I think that should be enough time. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Chang. I am one of the liaisons with Doctors of BC. I'm so thankful for the series that we've had, this webinar series. And this evening, you've joined us for the last of the series, tying it all together. The panelists that are joining us are amazing. I am just so excited to hear and learn and unlearn this evening. So without taking up any more time, I'd like to hand this over to Harley to get us started for this evening. Harley?
All right, thanks so much, Ben. And yes, thank you everybody for being here. And just let me join in too with you, Ben, to say it's so wonderful to have these amazing panelists. And so we want to get to them as quickly as we can, because you know, the title of tying it all together, as I think about it, it sounds like there's a definite way forward. I think there's many ways forward. And some maybe aren't so definite because we're kind of learning as we go in this work as well. But the experience of these three panelists will I think really help to give us some ideas and some concrete understandings of things that have been helpful in their journey. And that will help us all in our journeys as well. So I'm just really looking forward to getting to that portion. I'm going to share my screen here so that we stay on track, because we do want to get to the panelists as quickly as we can. And yes, it's hard to believe that we're in the 5th session now of this 5-part series. The time certainly has flown, and I'm hoping that you can see the full slide. Okay, thank you so much. And I just want to again acknowledge the physician advisory group that helped to give shape to this, and certainly, you know, the picture on the side there with the medicine wheel, that was something that was really important to the advisory group to help us to understand, you know, the coming together of Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And there's many different ways of expressing that. And certainly we always recommend, you know, whatever nation you're working with, look to their ways of knowing and being, their symbols, their knowledge to help guide that. But as an overall process to help us to understand that, we've looked to the medicine wheel to help guide us through a process that we feel is really based in cultural safety practice as well. And I also want to acknowledge the traditional and unceded territories in which we're all calling in from. I'm very thankful to the Comox people from where I'm calling in today, and this picture is of the Comox Harbor, and the First Nations people here have been just amazingly wonderful for my journey, and I feel it's a pleasure and a privilege to walk alongside them in this journey. And if it's your practice to put into the comments your location of where you're calling in from, please feel that is more than appropriate if that's your practice. You don't feel you have to unless it's a part of your practice. And I'm just going to speak for about 10 minutes or so, just giving us some kind of background to this work that we've been doing over the last 5 sessions. And then we also want to make sure that we spend a bit of time looking at the resources that we've put together for you. And Ben's going to come on and share a bit about that in a few moments. And then we'll get to hearing from these amazing panelists. So if you remember in our first session, we did a lot of work around foundational elements of Indigenous cultural safety. And I am going to go through just a few of them in a few moments, just the main ones, the principles behind this work. And then in our session 2, we connected Indigenous cultural safety to the stories of lived experience and examples of cultural safety practice. And Nalaga Avis O'Brien joined us for that. And then we looked at somatic regulation, and Dr. Ral Gupta joined us and shared with us his understandings that are helpful in building our skill for noticing what's going on in our bodies and how we can respond. And that helps us to be regulated and then co-regulated and looking at somatic experiencing around this work as well. And you've heard me mention this before, that the leading edge of this work, and especially around anti-racism work and anti-oppression work, is understanding how our bodies hold this colonial experience that we're all having. And so looking at that and trying to understand that so that we can train our bodies in other ways of being is really helpful for this journey. And then in session 4, it should say 4 there, Dr. Dana Hubler joined us and talked about allyship, what it means to walk alongside one another, and what are those helpful supports like communities of practice. And also we talked a little bit about ideas for reaching out to those that aren't willing to hear, what that means. And so Dana shared with us some of her ideas and experiences around that. And then today we're going to look at website resources and hearing from these amazing physicians here that have been on this journey for a number of years and bring their own lived experiences and what they see in their practice as well. And hopefully that will spark some conversation. So we'll make sure we save some time at the end to hear from you all as well. So again, just acknowledging our process. There'll be a few background things that I'll share now, and then we'll hear from the panelists. And Ben will share with us a bit as well, and then we'll provide space at the end for our conversation. And then just to know that we're all carrying a lot in this moment. I'm sure all of you have come from very busy days as well. So we just want to remind people to take some time to breathe, to center yourself, feel yourself settled into your chair or wherever you are. And it's so important to regulate ourselves in these moments. And when we're able to do that, we're able to learn it at a much deeper level as well. So we always try to recommend and provide a space where people can take a moment to breathe and to center yourself. And especially too, because the nature of this talk can be difficult, and when we're talking about some very difficult experiences, especially around racism and colonization and all of those sorts of things, and the many things that are going on in our environment as well. So again, just a reminder to breathe, to be kind to yourself and to others in these moments. And then we can also take some encouragement and some hope and some heart from, in this moment, we are doing what we're being called to do all across this country in terms of the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on Residential Schools, the 94 calls to action. We're paying attention to those elements. And in this moment, we are in that act of truth and reconciliation, and also paying attention to other commissions and investigations that have happened over the last few years that give us guidance for this work and give us a deeper understanding of what we're up against. And then a reminder of what cultural safety work is, and I've shared with you the work of cultural safety is helping us to understand the big picture, and not only about Indigenous cultures, but also about colonial structures. And so this picture of kind of a systems view of what we're up against, looking at the past and the present and the future, but then also to recognize the colonial structures that we exist in, all of us exist in. Understanding those dynamics is a major part of cultural safety work. And then I always like to give thanks to the Maori people, the Indigenous people of New Zealand, who brought this concept forward. And it was primarily nurses and primarily women. So acknowledging the wisdom and genius and brilliance of Indigenous women, I think is something important for myself as a male in this society. To always be bringing that forward is so important. And then also the work of First Nations Health Authority, and all the work they've done since 2013 to bring these concepts forward of cultural safety, that aspirational place of where we're hoping to get to, looking at the power structures colonial systems. And then how do we get there? Through a value-based process like cultural humility, of looking inward at the things that we carry within ourselves and how they show up in our structures around us. And then we always feel that this learning process is so important to remember, that we have to understand the history and current reality of what has happened here, and our connections to that personally as well is so important. And then that helps to point towards skills that are helpful, things like trauma-informed practice, or compassionate care, anti-racism. There's so many different skills that are helpful for us in on this journey. And then that helps to give direction to what we can do, the actions that emerge out of our coming together in this way. And oftentimes those actions are collaborative. And we've learned over the years, and really this is what cultural safety is about, is setting a tone, building a relational way of being, even when the circumstances are difficult. How do we build that container where we can hear the difficult things that we have to hear, and we can engage in ways that aren't comfortable, but those are helpful places for us to be, to learn about cultural safety. And some of the big things that we have to learn about is things like systemic racism, understanding that it's more than just those ugly interpersonal interactions that are based in hate and that sort of thing. There's more to it as well in terms of the system of racism. And that is, looking at the power structures and the system of complex social and political gears and levers that have been around for hundreds of years in a lot of cases, especially in terms of our Indigenous experience, thinking about things like the Indian Act and the reserve system and the doctrine of discovery and the Indian hospital system and the 60s scoop. And there's so many different things that have been in place for a long time. And when you have the power to put those into our reality and into our society, that's a part of systemic racism as well. And then sadly, that shapes the way that we see ourselves and the world around us. It shapes our identity, and it shapes the way that we walk in this world. And so that's a part of understanding systemic racism as well. And then where we want to get to in all of this is it's really expressed very beautifully in this quote that comes from Lila Watson, who shared it from a collective understanding. And it says, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Working together, this amazing group that's gathered here tonight, all of us working together and joining with others is we feel is the way forward in all of this. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben now to talk about the continued support that we want to offer you. And then we'll move on to the panelists. So I'm going to stop sharing, Ben, just in case there's something that you want to share.
Sure. Thank you, Harley. And I'm just going to put a link into the chat right now. This link will also be sent out after the webinar. So don't panic if you're not able to copy it down. But if you're able to right now, I'd recommend that you give a quick click on it and then bookmark it, because there will be a lot more useful information that will be posted on the Collaborate on Health website in the future. But let me just quickly show you the website. Right now, the link clicks you directly to the webinar series with a bit of context and background. For those of you that are attending this session and you weren't able to make previous sessions, there's the ability to look at previous webinar sessions. I'll click on the webinar resources just to highlight the information available there that Harley has provided prior to, as we were developing the webinar series and as the sessions continued, we've added to this. So all of the previous webinar videos are here. So you can always click on them and go back and review the material. I found that very helpful for when I've remembered something, but not quite exactly, and wanted to review the material. It's great to be able to go back and look at that link. So that's it. And like I said, all these links will be provided in an email after the webinar.
All right, thanks so much, Ben. And just a word too. I may have said this in previous sessions too, but we have found that repetition and having access to material that maybe you've seen before is beneficial. And really, we're looking to Indigenous ways of knowing and being to understand that, because if for many of us as Indigenous people, we know culturally and historically, wintertime, the time that we're in now, that's coming to a close here, was a time, especially in the northern hemisphere, where we would hear stories, creation stories, and teaching stories, and they would often be the same stories that you would hear year after year. But depending on where you were in your own personal journey, those stories would begin to mean other things to you, or you'd learn things at a deeper level. So we've taken that to heart in doing this work, and know that being iterative in our work is important, because you'll see different things and understand different things, and oftentimes you're gathered with other people as well that you may have looked at this information before with, and so they'll offer insight, and so you'll learn more as well. So this is a very iterative journey, and returning back to material is I find a really helpful process for my own learning. So I'm going to share my screen with you once again, because we're going to move into our time with our panelists now. And let's find my slide. That's the one. It should be popping up on your screen now. So what we're hoping to do in this next portion is spending time with our wonderful panelists here. So what I'm going to ask them to do is to take about 10 minutes or so, and we'll go through each of them, all three of them, so that they can introduce themselves in a way that's meaningful for them and their cultural practices, and to give you an idea of who they are. I'm sure many of you know these wonderful people already, but that's important in terms of setting a tone as well. So you'll see the cultural safety patterns, in our wonderful panelists here, and then each of them to share about what delivering culturally safe care means to them. What has been their experience? What have they learned over the years? So each of them will take about 10 minutes to do that. And then we'll go into some interview style questions, and each one will have a unique question that I'll ask them. And then they'll spend some time speaking to those questions. And hopefully that will give us a robust understanding of cultural safety practice. And then at the end, we'll provide some space that will open it up for conversation from you all. So that you can voice your comments and your thoughts and your questions. And I also want to say this here too, that I know that there's many people on this call that would be wonderful panelists as well. So I want to acknowledge the wisdom and the genius and brilliance of many of you on this call, as well as participants. So you might have some comments that you would like to share as well. So we're really looking forward to that time when you have that space to provide your thoughts. And there might be questions from some of you as well, based on what you hear from the panelists. So we're going to ask you to if you have comments or thoughts that you want to share in the moment, to please put them in the chat, and we'll take a look at those at the end after the panelists have spoken, and we'll ask those questions as well from the comments in the chat. But we'll save our vocalizing our questions till the very end for the space we provide there. And I think I've just said that in this last point here. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen now, because now it's time to move into our to our wonderful panelists here. And so I'm going to turn to Dr. Aldred to provide her introduction and speak to what providing culturally safe care means to her. And then after that, we'll turn to Dr. Tu, and then finally with Dr. Shah. So Dr. Aldred.
Thanks, Harley. It's nice to see you and nice to be in this large virtual circle with all of you. So Hadit, my name is Dr. Terry Aldred. I'm Dakep and Swiss on my mom's side, and Métis Cree and Mixed European on my dad's side. I come from the Lasilu, the Frog clan, which are traditionally known as the voice of the people, and those who navigate great transitions. My traditional territory is located just north of Fort St. James, and I'm calling in today from the Lheidli Traditional Territory, otherwise known as Prince George. And I am a mom, and I have a 14-month-old who may be having a hard time at times, so you may hear her in the background. I assure you she's safe and well taken care of. And so I'm a family doc by trade. I do my clinical work with Carrie Sakani Family Services. And we serve 12 First Nations communities in North Central BC. And I'm also the Executive Medical Director for Primary Care for FNHA and the co-site director for the Indigenous Family Medicine Program. All right, so the question about what does cultural safety and humility mean to me? Are we answering that next and then passing it on? Yeah, okay. So I'd like to start with what it means to me from a community perspective. So I've been a part of originally the cultural competency movement from pretty much since I entered medical school, and it's changed and shifted over time to now using the language more of cultural safety and humility. And it's work that I can't say I've developed an interest in because it's been part of my my whole life. Growing up, I grew up in the inner city and on reserve, and I've had family members and my own personal experiences accessing care or other interactions with systems and structures in Canada that has not felt safe. And I've had people that I know that have been harmed and have even passed away in less than ideal circumstances. And so this work is near and dear to my heart. And so what it means to me now is more of an aspirational goal, in that I hope to change the narrative that I hear from not just my family, but from my patients now around feeling afraid or apprehensive about seeking care, to one where they come back sharing their wonderful experiences accessing care and the wonderful individuals that they interacted with in those spaces. And as a person, it means cultivating a healthcare system where me and my family can feel safe and well cared for. And as a physician, it means for me to learn and practice developing critical self-reflection skills, so I understand my own worldview and what my own biases may be and how they may affect my behaviors and clinical interactions, so I can better understand the impact that has on the patients that I serve. And assessing impact is something that's really important, so that I am looking for and engaging in ways that I can seek feedback from the people I serve and patients, so that I can learn and adapt and grow and continue to improve my practice to serve them better. And so, yeah, I will stop there and pass it to Dr. Tu.
Thank you, Terry. And thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to meet virtually together. Yeah, I feel like I'm in circle with a great many people. And so I am grateful. And by way of introduction, my name is David Tu. I identify as a non-Indigenous family physician. My family hails from Wales and from northern China, and I grew up on the land of the Mississauga of the Credit people, also known as Toronto. But I've been living and working on Coast Salish territory for the last 23 years now. I am a father, I'm a husband, and we might all get disturbed because I'm also a dog owner, and my dog might start, my puppy might start acting up, so hopefully not. But I look for this session, I think how I would kind of, looking back at my own career, I think there's been cross-cultural medicine has been a dominant piece throughout my medical practice, initially on reserve for my first couple of years as a family doctor, and then working in East Africa with Médecins Sans Frontières. And then for the last 20 years, I've had my family practice based in Vancouver's downtown east side with an Indigenous focus to my practice. And for the last 5 years, I've been very lucky to be a part of a new clinic that started in the downtown east side called Kilala Lalem, which is where my whole practice is now based. Kilala Lalem is a Helcom Lalem word or name that was gifted to us from the Musqueam people, and it means butterfly house, or sometimes sort of house of transformation, if you like. My roles there is a leadership role to some extent. I'm on the board of Kilala Lalem, and it's a place that's near and dear to my heart. Just for relationship wise, Terry and I get to work together on the Indigenous Family Practice Residency program, and Ray and I get to work together as part of the First Nations and Aboriginal Primary Care Network that both of our clinics are part of. And it was seeing those two people who I have a lot of respect for on this panel was what made me want to join this panel and be with you all. So to answer the question, what does delivery of culturally safe care mean from a physician perspective? So I'm going to have a short answer to that question, but I'm going to start with the long answer. Because there really is a lot to unpack, and I'm grateful that you've all had taken the time to think about this over these previous sessions and in other parts of your life. But I'll start just by breaking down the question. The verb in that question is delivering, and the noun is care. And care is something as a non-Indigenous family physician. I know something about, and I've learned over my years that the 3 ingredients that need to be there for care to be impactful, including it being of the right quality, that the care is heartfelt, that means they're delivered within a relationship where the provider has some skin in the game, and that it has to be received in the context of trust from the person receiving care. And that third element, the trust, is really the crux of a lot of the work when you're a non-Indigenous person engaging with Indigenous people that needs to be earned. Without it, it's really hard to have a meaningful impact through your work. The adjective in that sentence is culturally safe. The word safety is relatively easy for us to understand, and probably most readily understood by thinking of its opposite, that being harm. To do no harm fits well within what we were all trained in medical school with the Hippocratic first principle of do no harm. And the harms that we're specifically looking at here that Terry alluded to was, just experiences of disrespect or discrimination that relate to an Indigenous identity or belonging to Indigenous culture. And it's that Indigenous culture and Indigenous identity that is much harder to understand. And I can say in my medical training, I really didn't receive any training on how to approach or understand those two concepts. Sometimes I'll do a teaching. I get to do teachings with Elder Bruce Robinson sometimes, and Elder Bruce sometimes makes a joke of saying that he loves yogurt because it has great culture, and cultural safety is about making sure the best before date on the yogurt hasn't passed. But the meaning behind making sort of light is that the word culture is just a word, but it can't capture the depth of meaning for an Indigenous person or really anyone deeply connected to their culture, where we're trying to just ascribe all the spiritual, the language, the legal systems, the medical systems, the practices that all fit in there. So it is a very difficult concept to wrap our brains around, which kind of leads to having to find some sort of workaround. And the workaround for myself is if I just conceptualize cultural safety as sort of a measure that the recipient of care is the judge of. So that person receiving care is going to determine if their experiences of the care that I delivered was safe or not. And that experience of care in a physician context is the sum of all of our practices. And we know that, we have lots of practices within medicine. If I practice evidence-based medicine, I'm more likely to probably have a quality diagnosis. If I practice active listening, I'm more likely to get an accurate history. And as you've talked about, it's the practice of cultural humility. I think we can all sort of center on that is promoting of what we're looking for here. And as mentioned, it's there's a practice, it's a process of self-reflection, and it's an openness to learn from others. And again, I'm going to remark that neither of these two practices, being humble in what we don't know, seeing others as experts, and self-reflection, we're not emphasized in our medical training. So these are things that we have to work harder at to gain access to. And coupling those with the skills around cultural awareness, which is just the skill of seeing the similarities and differences between cultures. The attitude of cultural sensitivity, which is really recognizing that those differences are important. And there is some cultural competencies knowledge. That's just actually knowledge of how to navigate within another culture. An example being at a new patient recently who just started sort of making fun of my age and my how I was presenting myself in clinic. And if knowing what I know about Indigenous culture, this was him signaling to me that we're on good terms now. We've arrived at the next level of our relationship. And if I didn't know that, I guess there's a chance that I might have been otherwise offended. But it's those practices in addition to the practice of anti-racism, which I think you've all looked at deeply. And I think In Plain Sight gives the most detailed definition of that I've seen. And that's the only thing I've sort of written down here on my notes, is that it's a practice of identifying, challenging, preventing, eliminating, and changing the values, structures, policies, practices, programs that perpetuate racism. So just that really active work involved. And I think if you take these two practices into play, you increase the likelihood that the experience of care is going to be culturally safe. And acknowledging that most of our patients are not going to turn around and give you that direct feedback. It's, yeah, I felt safe in that interaction. But we as physicians do know when we've gained the trust of the person that we're caring for. And I think that's really the signal. When you've made that transition with someone, when you know that they trust you and you are now able to kind of move forward. And I think that again is one of the most important outcomes of this practice, is that then when you have that trust, and if you can provide that heartfelt care that is the right quality for that person, you're going to be impactful. And so the short answer to what does delivering culturally safe mean, it's essential, because without it, you're really not able to have a meaningful impact through your work. So that's sorry for being so didactic there. And I'd love, if we get a chance later, I think to teach this through actual cases would be much more useful. And I got a couple in mind that I could circle back to. But I'll hand it over to Ray. It's your turn, Ray.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody, for attending. It's so important, and I mentioned this before, that as practitioners, doctors, we need to have a constant cycle of development and learning, and you're proving that by being here. So I'm very grateful for that, and I'm grateful for joining you from the beautiful Coast Salish territory here in the Squamish Nation. Raymond Chaboyer. I'm a family doctor here on the North Shore. I work out of both the Squamish Nation Clinic and the Tsleil-Waututh Clinic. I'm Cree First Nations background. I grew up in northern Manitoba, growing up in Churchill, polar bear capital of the world. Went to university in Winnipeg and medical school there. I was actually just your basic doctor. There wasn't really any specific First Nations slant to my work initially. I was a full-time ER doctor in Winnipeg for 5 years, and then I felt the call of going back to my people. I began working in northern Manitoba in Cree communities. I would fly in for anywhere from a few days to a few weeks at a time. And having done that in northern Manitoba, I basically ended up here in BC, doing work primarily with First Nations people. I would say, you know, with the question of what does it mean to deliver culturally safe care, I think that, you know, the first priority when you're working with First Nations people is, I think you have to have a relationship. Otherwise, things don't really get done. You have to have what's called a therapeutic alliance. And that's something that in some people, some of my patients, that can happen very quickly. Other patients, it can take years. You know, many of my patients, and I'm sure many of yours too, especially with First Nations people, may have had very, very negative encounters with the healthcare system, with doctors, with nurses. And even when they're confronted with a First Nations physician, it may very well be that there is that distrust that they have, and sometimes we have to just take the time to let that work its way out through trustful encounters with those patients who have had a lot of negative encounters, like I say. But it certainly, you know, is something that is critical in order to do this work, that you have to have an alliance with the patient. It was interesting when I heard Ben during the introduction to this discussion, he mentioned that we're here to learn and we're also here to unlearn. And I would say that, you know, your typical ER doctor, which I was for 5 years, you know, you, for self-protection, you kind of hold people at arm's length. I had literally had a white coat on, and I sort of kept my patients at bay a little bit. And I found very quickly when I worked up north that I can't do that. You have to have, you have to be prepared to get off the proverbial white horse. Take off the white coat, introduce yourself to your patients. You have to maybe even introduce a little bit of vulnerability. You have to let people know who you are, where you come from. And that's something that is, I think, kind of critical in order to do this kind of work. And one thing I will say also is that I've learned that my work with First Nations people has allowed me to be in a position of learning, and it's amazing. I think that often I get almost as much out of my patient contacts as the patient does. You know, I'm Cree, like I said. There are significant differences in the cultural habits and the more or less the cultural traditions of the Cree people versus the Coast Salish people. I learn more and more about it every time I work here on the North Shore. One thing I will say is that I've learned also that there was incredible strength within the First Nations culture, which has been lost somewhat. If you look back at their traditional lifestyle of being very family and community oriented, people would be raised by the village essentially. Here in our modern lifestyle, we're kind of family units where you have the parents and the kids, and we don't have as much contact with extended family members. And I think there's incredible strength in the traditional First Nations lifestyle of having the aunties, the uncles, the grandparents, and just other family members surrounding each individual and being able to help support those people through their life journey. It's something that I think modern Canadians could learn a lot from. And, things, what we think of as modern concepts, mindfulness, meditation, forest bathing, river bathing, these are all concepts that have been practiced for thousands of years. In the Coast Salish people, that's a huge part of their lifestyle, and they're sort of refamiliarizing themselves with it now because they lost it for a while with the contact in the last 100 years or so. And of course, the connection with nature, that's something that's similar throughout all First Nations peoples. One other thing I'll say is that my work has taught me that I have to be in a position to advocate against racism, because racism very much exists within our medical system still. We have to be prepared to call it out when we see it. It's important that when we do call it out, if we see a doctor or a nurse making a racist comment or an action, I think you have to do it in a certain way. You can't just sort of get the person all, you don't want to confront anybody, but quietly pull them aside, talk to them that you recognize that they might not have been aware of something that they just said, that it might have not been what they intended. You have to do it in a certain way, but you have to be prepared to confront those issues when you see them, because you will see them. I see my patients coming back with stories all the time that I'm having to pick up and advocate for them with our current system. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks so much to each of you. You've said so much that I think we can build on. And hopefully folks on the call are hearing those things, and you're thinking about comments and reflections you'd like to make. And again, if you want to put them in the chat now, that would be wonderful. But I think what we'll do now is turn to each of the panelists once again. And I have some specific questions that I thought I would ask them. And some of these, because I know Dr. Aldred, we shared a lot of work together, and then also just listening to Dr. Chaboyer over the last 4 sessions, there's certain things that I've picked up from him that I think are that we will ask some more about. And then listening to Dr. Tu, also I think the question that I have for him fits really well with what he shared. So the question that I have for Dr. Aldred is, can you speak to what I'll call this the art of cultural safety? And I mean that in terms of, an artist that you go through a long period of time of developing your skill and developing things and noticing things and expressing things in a certain way. And in our conversation before, you talked about that each experience, each connection that you have with a patient is different. Even sometimes it's the same patient, but there's other things that have happened, and so you have to be aware of those things. So I just wanted to ask you that. Can you speak to the importance of paying attention to all of the nuances of each individual in a culturally safe way?
Yeah, thanks, Harley. It's such a interesting question, and I've been thinking about it a lot. So hopefully it makes my mind go many different ways. So I'll try to keep it succinct and maybe just speak to a few things. So I think part of recognizing cultural safety and humility as an art, it is that part of that art is going internal. So again, Dr. Tu spoke to this very well about needing to cultivate our self-reflection so we can build our awareness for our humility and our sensitivity. And so I won't go through that again, but those parts are really important. We need to understand first who we are and what our worldview is. And especially for those who may be racialized as white or come from a Euro-Christian kind of Western Europe background, a lot of that worldview is considered to be the status quo. And so sometimes it can be challenging to identify it as, or identify that other people may have differences in that worldview or may experience things differently. And so it can be even more important to spend time thinking about that and spending time, reflecting on that. And then I also think it's important, I'm sure Dr. Gupta, spoke to this very eloquently about also recognizing that we all come from our own families of origins. We all have our own lived experience. Some of us may have intergenerational traumas and things like that. And so saying that we have different things that will show up for us in every day. And so learning how we take care of ourselves so that we can best take care of others. And so one of the teachings that I was gifted by my Kumu, Lawrence Aki from Hawaii, is around developing that strong foundation like a lighthouse, that it's really important for healers to cultivate that so that they can stand strong in life's storms to help navigate the way for others. And the strong foundation is different for all of us. All of us need different things to be healthy and well. And in some of my cultural teachings closer to home, it's around looking at our own medicine wheel. How do we look at our own mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical wellness? Because when we're attuned to those things, it is easier to be heart-centered. It's easier to be compassionate when we show ourselves self-compassionate. It's easier to be gentle and to be kind when we do those things for ourselves. And my favorite definition of kindness is love in action. And so it's not just being nice, although I do say if you just need to be nice, you can fake it till you make it. But, really to show up with kindness. And when we ask our elders, we say, what would you like me to tell healthcare professionals when I speak to them? And almost universally, they'll say, we just want them to be kind. And so recognizing that when we cultivate that in ourselves, we are more able to give that to others and to show up in that really, really good way. And then when we approach that through the ethical space, when we're working with others, and when we're working and collaborating on another person's healing journey, our clients or patients, my favorite term I heard is from Nalaga, who I know spoke to you guys as well, is just to say there are relatives. Again, that idea of respect, reciprocity, the fact that we're all one, that we're really just sitting with our relatives and walking with them in their healing journey. And that person's healing journey can be very different. And one of the things that, looking at Indigenous people is that due to colonialism, to ongoing experience of racism, people will have various levels of connection to their culture. Some people may be living in their traditional territories. Some people may be urban and away from home, and their traditional territories could be very far away. Some people may have had been disrupted from their families of origin. And so they may not have strong connections to, say, their culture or their teachings. And so we just need to be very sensitive and walk with people where they're at and and not ascribe meaning, and to be cautious about kind of pan-indigenizing or assuming levels of importance or painting Indigenous people as needing to be a certain way. And that's very common when we have certain like media and different things that kind of perpetuate Indigenous people and put Indigenous people into certain boxes. And so it's really important to explore that nuance. Like trauma-informed practices and treatments is something that's really near and dear to my heart, and a very powerful teaching I learned working with my communities and people that I serve, is that for some people, their trauma has been connected to a cultural practice, say like picking berries. And so that's important to know. And again, to always just approach things with sensitivity, approach things with that humility, and explore with people where they're at. And so I'm not entirely sure if that's what you had in mind, Harley, as far as like nuances, but I think all of these things are, well, need to be honored to the individual in their current context. And I'll just say that, you know, as a whole, Indigenous cultural teachings, healing practices, if that is important to an individual and they're connected to that, there's good evidence to support that it actually improves health outcomes, extends life expectancies, etc. It's a really powerful. It's really powerful for us to be connected to who we are, to know where we come from. And it's important to walk with people in that journey in a good way. And so maybe I'll just stop there.
Wow, I just want to say thank you so much for that, Dr. Aldred. There's so many profound things you said in there. I really like how you connected, like how you define kindness as love in action, and then connecting it to the words of Nalaga about treating each other as relatives. And if you think about the word kind, that's the root of the word kind, kin, right? So it's found in the word there of treating each other as relatives through that act of kindness. That's what kindness is treating each other as relatives. And I really appreciate too how you talked about a word that came up for me as you were talking about navigating through, you know, various people's experiences that you don't really know in the moment, but you have to be, you know, willing to hear and to navigate that in the moment. And I thought of the word agility. And I think there's one of my mentors that's here in the Comox First Nation. He talks about that as cultural agility, you know, and how do you respond in the moment, knowing that everybody's experience is different. But if you want to build trust and be there in a culturally safe way, that agility becomes really important. And I think just as you mentioned too, having that foundation that you can work from is so important. And like you said too, that foundation looks different for every service provider as well, but finding that foundation is so important. So thank you so much for your profound words here. So now I'll turn to Dr. Tu and ask, oh, and I just wanted to mention too, to each of the panelists too, there'll be a few moments after each of you have spoken to these unique questions where you might have some thoughts you want to add to each other's comments as well. So I'll make sure there's a bit of space for you to share that as well. But Dr. Tu, as a physician striving to deliver culturally safe care, what do you need from your clinic setting? And you mentioned that you're a leader in your clinic. So that is, what are the supports that you need around you as a care provider, as a physician, to have the freedom and the ability to deliver culturally safe care? And I think your setting and in your clinic is so we can learn from how that's been built in your clinic setting as well. So what are some of those elements?
Well, thank you for the question, Harley. And so it was nice to go after Terry, who kind of just lays the groundwork in a really good way. It's a good question, and it's a nice timing for me, sort of being in a new clinic that just opened 5 years ago. where we got a chance to start from scratch with a real mandate to provide care that was going to be culturally safe, that was going to be equity oriented, an equalizing factor for Indigenous people in the downtown east side, and respond to the calls to action in health laid out by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So if I think about my own kind of clinic setting and how it is evolved, I know when we first began, we looked actually at the patient medical home model. And if you look at that model in a little bit of detail, there are a number of sort of enablers, or they call system or practice enablers. For example, having an information system, an EMR system is going to help you organize people's stories. Using research and teaching is going to improve certainly certain aspects of care. Having a continuous quality improvement approach is going to impact care. Some of the things that have evolved in our system, well, one that is probably above and beyond the system is just the fact that over half of the staff who work at Kilala Lalem identify as an Indigenous person. Staffing does make a difference, and they've shown this in a number of settings, that if you go walk into a room and you see people who you can identify with, you know, that they're there's some sameness there, that having that diversity of people in your staff can make people feel more at home and like they belong there. And we are really blessed with certainly a lot of our Indigenous staff have a very strong voice within our organization, and our leadership is led by that voice, I feel, which sets the tone for the whole organization. And again, I know that's not going to be the same for everyone everywhere, but I see how much difference that makes in how we just approach the work that we do, having a clear chamber for that Indigenous voice to sound. And everything that I think enables me in our setting to provide culturally safe care, and again, not that there's one thing, all have to do with broadening the concept of medicine. We have, I think, learned a very narrow understanding of medicine in our formal education. But one thing that I've come to appreciate is actually the elders that work in our clinic, and we have an elder that's there every day of the week now, and also elders that do outreach and involved in other cultural programs. That connection to an elder is medicine. That relationship that people form, and the elder's role specifically is a type of medicine for people. Having that in our setting, having that medicine in our setting, again, facilitates and sets a certain tone and creates an atmosphere conducive to establishing that trust and those relationships that Ray affirmed to. Also, kind of framing the relationship as medicine itself, that actually that relationship nourishes both the patient or the recipient of care as well as the provider. And that a lot of the benefits that people experience in that sort of care, in that care environment, come from the relationship itself and the quality relationship. And so just echoing concept of kindness and love within that relationship is medicine above and beyond anything else that happens. And so I think just having that understanding and that attitude changes things, and it also frees you up to invest more in establishing those relationships. And many of us are practicing sort of team-based care. So that medicine is imparted from all the members of your team. So again, just honoring and making space that we need to all have that kind of kind, positive interaction and connection to the people that we're caring for. And that is part of the medicine that we bring. So that's a systems level appreciation of that value. Also appreciating that the environment is medicine. And we got to start with a blank slate and had an Indigenous architect, Patrick Stewart, kind of design our space. and we've been gifted with some beautiful works of art, many from the downtown East Side community members and artists, and that space being respectful, clean, and kind of filled with beautiful and important objects, is a form of medicine as well. It feels like a healing space, and that also contributes to being able to put people at ease and to be able to kind of move forward. So I guess just that recognition. Also understanding food as medicine. This is the first place that I've worked that we have a full sort of industrial sized kitchen, and we feed a lot of people from our health center. About 1,600 meals go out each week. And it does, food is medicine, and it creates a certain connection with people. When people have actually, if someone comes in hungry and the first thing that they're offered is, can I get you something to drink? Do you need something to eat? Facilitates me being able to have a conversation about their health. We established something called the pantry, which is basically, it looks like a corner grocery store that is kind of really stocked by wonderful donations from a number of organizations. And it's a really respectful space where if there was someone that is experiencing some food insecurity, they're given a shopping bag, and they're able to shop and pick what they want from that pantry. And that, just knowing that that's part of where they're coming for their care, it recognizing that food is such an important medicine in all of our lives also sets a tone. The other thing is about honoring the notion of what Terry was mentioning about sort of being trauma informed, if you like, but having it across the whole team, and trauma sort of writ large, in the sense of understanding the historic violence and trauma that has happened through colonization and what continues to happen today in people's lives, understanding how that impacts how someone might perceive a certain circumstance, how that trauma might manifest in how they're presenting with a health concern. It's an important understanding to have, and having that so throughout your whole team, not just amongst your physicians, so that when someone is coming in and they're obviously activated, that from every person they encounter knows that this person needs a chance to kind of ground themselves, to be supported, and doesn't need us to react, to be less reactive in a sense. And I think it's a lot of those things that come together that make the clinical medicine side kind of quite easy to deliver, and somehow a lot less important than a lot of those other things. So again, it's a big package, and it is a transformation. Like I'm working in a place now that looks very different from where I've worked in the past. And I think there is a call for all of us to think about how we do want to transform where we're working to make it a more safe space and more effective space for care. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Dr. Tu. I think about all of the elements to create that structure that have to be in place, from the way your board probably is constructed and the decisions that are made, the leadership and all of that has to be thought about, for those of us that want to advance cultural safety in our setting. So thank you for providing that insight into those behind the scenes almost, but so powerful elements that are required in those spaces. So I'm going to turn to Dr. Chaboyer now, and I really appreciated how in your introduction you talked about relationships and therapeutic alliance, and how important that is to build that trust. And then you said and that takes time often, right? And you work in an industry where often time is hard to come by. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around what are some of the opportunities that you're seeing in the system that may help to increase culturally safe care. And I've heard you talk in the past about the new fee model that just came into place February. Maybe there's some space there to have a bit more time to practice in that way. So yeah, I'd just love to hear some of your thoughts about some of the shifts that you're seeing and how they can help to create opportunities for providing culturally safe care.
Yeah, thank you, Harley. Thank goodness for the new system. You know, the fee-for-service system, we were just, you know, the chat, we were talking about that a little bit. It's very difficult to provide good culturally safe care in a 5 to 10 minute visit. Maybe if you know the patient really, really well and you have a long history with them, you can do it. I've tried to do it since I arrived here in BC in the early 2000s. I've had primarily a First Nations based practice working in the fee-for-service system. So yes, it can be done, but I've paid the price literally in my pocketbook because, you know, I would often see 1 or 2 people an hour, and you can't really do that. You can't function financially and get away with it and run a clinic when you need to spend that amount of time with patients in a fee-for-service system. So very grateful that the province has, you know, basically allowed our doctors that were in the negotiating committee to come up with the LFP model for family doctors, which basically pays for time as well as the encounter. You know, so obviously this type of care takes time, and now we will be paid for that. And, you know, there's a lot of background work that doctors do when the patient isn't in front of them. Advocacy work, you know, even things like filling out forms for the special authority and for getting our patients medications funded and medical equipment and things like that, and writing letters and that sort of thing. And previously that wasn't paid for. So very grateful that this is happening. I do have to say that before we pat ourselves on the back, it's not quite where it needs to be. It's still volume based. You still will be paid far better if you have a busy practice where you have a lot of patients coming through your doors. They need to find a way to fit the complexity of the patient population into the fee structure. It's actually creating a problem right now in one of the clinics where I work. You know, one of the physicians has chosen to leave, and partly because of the new model, and we can't really compete with the way things are right now, because essentially doctors in the old system and to some extent even in the new system will be paying a compassion tax to work with First Nations people, because you will be paid less to work with First Nations as it is right now. And that can't stand. I mean, we have to have equity there. We don't want to have to compete amongst each other to staff our clinics, you know, in a system that promotes volume. So I'm hoping that, you know, I've mentioned this to the negotiators, to the ministry in various meetings, and I'm hoping that they'll correct that, because it's an obvious huge gap. The other thing I'll say is that, you know, just this meeting today, the culturally safe training that's happening, you know, this has come out in the last few years. And this is a huge part of delivering better care to First Nations people and to any racialized people, actually, within BC. We need to have this kind of awareness. I am a little bit cognizant that probably the people we most want to reach, the physicians that we most want to reach, are the least likely to attend these sessions. So I'm aware of that gap too, and I don't know how we can reach out to those that we need to reach out to the most. Hopefully it'll happen with time. And like I say, we'll often be left in a position where we have to advocate when we see ongoing racism happening. I just want to say one quick thing about what David was saying about how do we, sort of what do we need within a clinic to provide good care. And certainly the elders is a huge thing, and having your waiting room set up. Right now we're looking at having the traditional territory, the map within our waiting room, some of the pictures of some of the local elders in our community. Pictures will be up in our waiting room, and having that notion that we're not there just to manage disease, which is what our medical system is set up to do. We want to manage wellness, and actually our network with David too and myself and many other doctors are working on introducing that concept or formally into our healthcare system. So I'll just leave it there, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Chaboyer. So I'm just looking at the time here, but I do want to provide just a few moments for each of the physicians here on the panel to just share any, what might have come up for you that you wanted to touch on before we open it up to the group. So, Dr. Aldred, any final comments, thoughts?
No, I mean, I think that, I think I'm good, actually. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Tu?
Yeah, the thing I heard both from Terry and from Ray that resonates with me is one thing that we're trying to create is kind of a kinship model of care, like where people feel like you're in your extended family's home. Is kind of the feeling, and the way you care for people, the standard to which you care for people is that what you would expect for your own family members, what I would want my own cousin, my own sister, my own auntie, my own uncle to receive. And I think that that concept of a kinship model would strengthen all of our systems across. If we held that same standard broadly, not just for Indigenous or other racialized groups, but for all people. So I think it's an important learning, and that's something again that I know I've heard frequently from the elders that we work with, is that you're caring for our relatives. We are all one people. There's so much that we share as common between us, and that's what we should be focusing on.
Thanks so much, David. Dr. Tu, and then Dr. Chaboyer, closing thoughts.
Yeah, I've been doing this a long time without totally aging myself, into my fourth decade of healthcare now. I was really hoping when I went into medicine that I would see a flood of First Nations people, come into the medical system as doctors. And I wouldn't say that there's been a flood, unfortunately. I would love to see more. What David mentioned about, it would be great to have First Nations healthcare providers in our clinics. It's not always possible. But research shows very, very clearly that when a healthcare provider is matched with a patient, for instance, with African American obstetrical outcomes and also heart failure outcomes. There's been some recent research that shows that the outcomes are better when the patient is matched with their provider. The other thing I'll say is that we need to meet people where they are rather than where we would hope they would be. And our First Nations network, we're introducing a mobile van in the downtown east side. That's an outreach for vulnerable women in the downtown east side. And, that's an example where, we can't always expect people to have an appointment in a clinic when they're homeless, when they have no way of transporting themselves to get to the clinic. So, and also just sort of mentally, we need to reach people where they are rather than where we hope they will be. The final thing I'll say is that we need to be vulnerable as providers. We need to let our guard down a little bit. And sometimes that's hard to do. And that's something we have to learn how to do. I'm not saying that everybody should do this. I actually took a big chance this week on Tuesday. There was a heart disease workshop that we held at the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and many of my patients have know that I play guitar. So actually, during the heart disease workshop, they convinced me to play my guitar and sing a few songs in the gym at the local community. And you don't have to do that, but even just like if you have patients that, if you go to attend a funeral, you can learn a huge amount about the community going to a funeral or a cultural ceremony like powwow. There's opportunities for you to take part in the community to show you that you're there. And I would encourage everybody to do that whenever possible.
Wow, thanks so much. Just thinking about that act of vulnerability, and I want to open it up to the group now and just ask if there's anybody that wants to have an opportunity to practice some vulnerability and ask some questions or make some comments, because it really does take practice, right? And kind of putting yourself out there, if you will, but recognizing that there's strength in that as well is just so helpful. So I also want to draw the attention of the panelists to the chat boxes as well, because there's been some good questions there and comments. So, and we will collect those as well. And just as was said at the beginning, that we can work towards answering them too, and sending out emails and that sort of thing. But I would love to hear if there's anybody on the call here that would like to ask a question or to make a comment. And you can either just put up your hand or we'll notice you if you want to just jump in.
I can, while somebody is maybe, getting brave to ask a question live, I can answer one that was in the chat about adverse community experiences. And so, which refers to the adverse childhood experiences study that was done looking at adverse childhood experiences and how it correlated to health outcomes later on in life. And certainly this topic, a conversation around trauma, the impacts of trauma, how it impacts intergenerationally and that sort of thing, I think is really important. And it's important to know that there's still a lot of gaps around. That study was done mostly with a white middle-class population, and certainly did not incorporate things like BIPOC lived experiences, the idea of intergenerational trauma and things like that. There have been a few studies and books written on that, including the book Legacy, and which I think is by Sue Muirhead. Don't quote me on the author's name. And then there's a PhD dissertation about indigenizing trauma-informed care best practices that kind of review, the benefits, the nuances, the importance, and some important considerations. And so I think part of that is that when we think of adverse community experiences, it's actually looking at like, what is the impact when a large portion of the population may have experienced trauma. And I would say that there's still work to be done, but I think that one of the things to point to is that when we look at health determinants and lower life expectancy in Indigenous people compared to non-Indigenous people, I think therein lies what happens when there's adverse community experience on top of adverse childhood experiences. And as one residential school survivor said, if you've been to residential school, then your ACE score is 10 plus. And so I think it's an important topic, and I know it's been covered in some of the series, but I just wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Aldred. And there's so much that we have to work at understanding. And And Dr. Smecker makes a really good point there about the Métis story and the Métis voice. That has to, there's so many areas that we have to work at, increasing visibility and understanding, and thinking about Inuit folks as well. There's so much work to do for all of us, more than a lifetime of work for all of us to be on this journey. So, so can I ask if there's anybody else that would like to make a comment from the participants? Ask a question? Just cycling through the faces here, see if anybody's raising their hand. Feels like they have a question, like comment they'd like.
There was another question around intergenerational relationships, and that they're important, and how is that supported in practices, and I'm sure David, Dr. Tu and Dr. Shaboye can relate to this, but my practice is mostly on reserve, and so I see intergenerational members of families all the time, often all together and all at once. And so I think that I think it's probably true for all people, but in particular for Indigenous populations, that it's really hard to separate a person's individual health from community health, or their community health, or their family's health. And so I think that's why it's important to look at a both and, like working with individuals and people with where they're at, and also looking to be involved and contribute in ways that can help support the community in their wellness goals. And that's including supporting things like self-determination, supporting them to have their sense of autonomy and stewardship, and be able to help inform and co-design and co-implement things about their healthcare system and any other system that's working with them. Thanks. And I don't know if Dr. Shaboye or Dr. Tu would like to speak to that.
Happy for you, Dr. Aldred, to call me David is good. and what's one of the privileges of being a family doctor for a length of time. I guess my practice is fortunate, it's been continuous for about 20 years. And so I have a lot of people who I've known as parents who are now grandparents. I know kids who are now parents, and the relationships and we just have such a privileged position as family physicians within people's lives, because understanding those connections between family and how interwoven people's lives are. Especially when there's a birth and how many people are actually related to that person, or when there's a death and how many people are touched by that. And just those, I don't know, hard to answer the question from the chat exactly of what they were getting at, but I know that those relationships are so important, and we're just in a good position to be able to help navigate and support those connections. And that's, the healthy people come from healthy communities, generally speaking.
Thanks so much for that. And I do see that Dr. Daisy Dulay has her hand up. Turn it over to you.
Might be on mute, Daisy.
Can't hear you yet, Daisy.
Is this any better? Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'll start all over again. Thank you, Harley, and thank you to the panelists for your wisdom and words for us to think moving forward. And hi, Dr. Terry. I just had a question. It came back. There was a comment with regards to patients coming back to the family practice, and it's not just like one of those things that I'm wondering about is how do we provide some of that feedback to specialists like myself, where sometimes we may not be aware that we have done something, and it would not many, some of us may be ready for that feedback with humbleness. And I was just curious, how can we work on that? And I'd love to hear your thoughts around that, because I think that's another area that sometimes is hard, because there is that perceived, I'd hate to say power differential, but it shouldn't exist. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
I'll take a first response to that. Just
زي الماما يلا
I had a
تعالي اغني لك انا تعالي اغني لك.
I had a patient who it took me a long time. He's a sort of in his 60s Indigenous man, bad knee arthritis. It took me a long time to convince him to go see an orthopedic surgeon who I know well, and I was confident that the surgeon would give him would treat him appropriately, and I really built that up for this person who had not had great experience with the healthcare system. And it was just one of those things where there's a new system in the orthopedic world about having physiotherapists do the screeners before, just to kind of vet the referral. And unfortunately, he had an awful experience with a physiotherapist who, the office was in Richmond. He's from the downtown east side, and he felt judged and felt not like kin, not welcomed. And he doesn't want to go see the surgeon now. He clearly needs the surgery, and it's yeah. I will take the time, because I know this surgeon, and I'll just let him know about the experience that this person had. But I think it's not just the specialist physician, like we said, it's the whole team, it's the whole experience. So it's training beyond our specialist colleagues to like so many parts of the system. Yeah, and sort of what Ray was alluding to, that we do have a responsibility just to inform each other when we see something that isn't playing out appropriately. I don't know if there's another answer, but that it's a crunchy part that we just need to work through. And it continues to, it does happen. It happened today in my practice. So it's sort of fresh for me to mention.
Yeah, thank you, David. I would say also that we have to hold the system, the health authorities, the ministry to task when those sorts of things happen. In addition to family doctors advocating with the specialist, if that's what the issue is. You know, there are patient navigators now built into the system, and maybe, you know, if we're worried that something like that might happen, we might have a patient navigator attend the appointment with the patient. But even so, this system is still rife with problems. You know, whether it's no-show fees, you know, we have patients that are completely broke and homeless, and they're charged $100 fee because they missed their appointment because for whatever reason, and now they can't go back to that office because they can't pay their $100 fee. You know, these are things that we need to say to the health authority. This is happening in your health authority. What are you going to do to fix it? And you know, that's kind of what the network that David and I are part of. We try to do that. But if you're aware of anything, any of the providers or doctors here, you know, I think you should consider reaching out to the health authority, because they do have a big part to play in remedying some of these deficiencies.
Well, you know, thank you everybody for your questions and your comments. And as ever, time is in short supply, and so we've come to the end of our time here. So I just want to thank you for allowing me to journey with you over these 5 sessions, and thank you for all of the amazing speakers that we've had over these series, and especially to the panelists that were here tonight. Thank you so much. And I want to turn it over to Donna, I think, to close out our session here.
I think it's me. I'm Tracy. I'm with the Joint Collaborative Committees, and on behalf of the JCCs, I just want to thank the amazing panelists that we've had tonight, and you, Harley, as well, for facilitating just an amazing you know, heartfelt session. We got so much out of this tonight. So kaisapka to all of you and to the participants. I do want to say that we have more sessions planned the next fiscal year, starting April onwards. We don't have dates yet, but we are planning some Métis specific sessions. So thank you, Kurt, for that. We also have various longhouse sessions that we're planning in partnership with Len Pierre Consulting to bring physicians into First Nations communities to learn about residential school trauma and to learn more about local culture. So stay tuned and look for those to register, as well as the Compassionate Leadership Program. So this has just been an amazing series, and I thank you for your time tonight. We do have a short survey. This really helps us to plan future events like this. So that will pop up when we close out the meeting. So thank you all again. Have a really great night.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Right.